Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the Halton Local Plan afternoon session. The inspectors will be joining shortly and will take over. Thank you. The inspectors have joined the meeting and will take over shortly. Thank you.
Good afternoon and welcome back to the hearing session on Matter 16, Greenbelt Safeguarded Land, and in particular in relation to Safeguarded Site 12, Notcutts Garden Centre. Can I just check that everybody can hear me okay? Thank you. I believe that there aren't any new participants for this session. Mr. Hopkins, you were here for this morning's session, I believe.
Yes, I was. Thanks.
Okay, thank you. Well, that saves me going through the formalities, the opening statements. Do you have any questions, Mr. Hopkins, in terms of the procedural side of things?
No, that's fine.
Okay. Obviously, if you do wish to make a point, just use the raise hand function, and I'll bring you in as soon as we can. Can I just remind everyone to keep the mobile phones turned off, just to avoid any background noise. So that's brilliant. We can now get started straight into the meat and bones of the issue, and looking at the safeguarded site 12, land adjacent to Notcutts Garden Centre. First of all, can I ask the council, Mr. Cross, to kick off in just setting out how the site, the safeguarded land, was identified and which options were considered? Thank you.
Yes. Sorry. Yes, thank you. The site was actually proposed as an allocation together with the adjacent garden centre site and the publication version of the local plan that identified the joint site as having capacity of about 225 units. With the changes to the plan, with the reduction in the housing requirements, the council obviously relooked at the proposed allocations and basically came to the view that it probably wasn't justified to seek an allocation on the land at this time. So the proposals were amended to show the garden centre site as white land. That was a deliberate choice in order to not prejudice the future commercial use of the site, should that be the site owner's preference, but also to not prejudice the redevelopment and reuse of the site, should the site owners decide that the site was no longer viable in its current use and bring it forward for development. The back half of the site, which was in the green belt, was decided that would be, to use the phrase that was used in previous sessions, relegated to safeguarded land under reference SG12. The previous housing reference in the earlier draft of the plan was W41. Having just been looking at it at lunchtime, had a little sort of oh my god moment, and spotted that the site area quoted in the DALP document is actually relates to the previous W41, so it includes the garden centre site. So the plan's currently quoting the site as being about 10 hectares, whereas it's actually about 4.17 is the safeguarded area. So we will make that correction to the written statement. In terms of if the site was, let's say the site's 4.71, if it were to be allocated for housing at this time, the notional calculation would suggest a capacity of about 101, but obviously the site is quite an irregular shape with the sort of access down round the back of the garden centre, so whether 101 is completely deliverable is possibly questionable.
Just to clarify, just to clarify, Mr. Cross, that would just be on the site identified as safeguarded land to be excluded from the green belt.
Yes. Yes, so see the previous capacity, including the white land garden centre, was assumed to be 225. So just on the safeguarded, we're looking at about 101 units. The reason that the council chose to basically, this is one of the sites that the council chose to abandon the proposed allocation at this time was primarily down to decided by the Greenbelt function. And again, we'd make reference to the Greenbelt function, the sort of Greenbelt overall function map. And you can see that the site, the safeguarded site, is identified as making a moderate contribution to the green belt. There's also, I say, in terms of access, I think the draft schemes that we have seen primarily are looking to take have an access, secondary access, down past the southern side of the garden centre. If you've been out on site, again, you maybe see there's a bit of an unkempt green corridor, which unsurprisingly is the viaduct or the aqueduct again. So it's a corridor where you can't build. In terms of greenbelt function, I say the site does have potential for some strong boundaries to the east and the west. To the east of the site is Twyford Lane, so an existing road, which does offer the opportunity for a strong boundary. And to the west is what's a former railway line, usually referred to as the mineral line, which over about the last 5 or 6 years or so was converted into a cycleway linking Widnes and St Helens, which again is a hard physical boundary.
Sorry to interrupt you just before we get on to the Greenbelt function. In terms of, I suppose, why the council took a step back from that site, is it sort of safe to summarise that in terms of that group of sites, North East Widnes, that the site performed less well, if you like, or better in terms of Greenbelt function than the other North East Widnes sites?
Yes.
And we'll come on to physical constraints later, but were they a factor in pulling back from the site as well, or was it mainly the Greenbelt function?
The site, the safeguarded site is agricultural land grade 2, we believe. So I say it does score well in Greenbelt terms on that issue. I say it is in countryside use. Whilst yes, it is contiguous with the urban area. I say it's the garden centre and the backland to the garden centre that forms the boundary. Obviously, as I say, there are some other sites that we are still proposing for residential allocation that also perform either moderate or parts of the site can perform a significant greenbelt function. However, I say they're part of wider grouped sites, and if you look at the group site as a whole, they perform less well.
Okay, thank you. And just now looking at the contribution which the site makes to Greenbelt purposes, if we can just take purpose 1 first of all, in terms of checking the unrestricted sprawl of large built-up areas, what was the findings of the study in that aspect?
It concluded that the site was partially contained. It's not contiguous. Well, it identified it as being not contiguous. We should probably qualify that by saying that obviously the site immediately to the south was also in the greenbelt, so obviously didn't have a boundary, a contiguous boundary there. If that site is removed from the greenbelt, then effectively yes, it will have a contiguous boundary with the urban area.
Okay. And in terms of boundary strength?
I say there's potential for strong boundaries to the eastern side, Twyford Lane, to the western side, the mineral line, the new cycleway, and it was identified as being a moderate boundary to the north. Effectively, I think it's sort of it's broken vegetation along the north, so it was adjudged as moderate.
Okay, thank you. And in terms of purpose 2, preventing neighbouring towns from merging, what was the outcome of the assessment there?
Again, it's everywhere is in a comparatively narrow gap, but in terms of the overall gaps or distance to the nearest settlement in North Widnes, it actually sits in one of the wider gaps, so it wasn't a major factor.
And in terms of rounding off the settlement?
I think I say it was assessed in terms of, it was assessed as not contributing to rounding. And I think you can see just from looking at the position on the map, it would actually create a bit of a projection into the greenbelt.
And was that a factor taken into account in terms of stepping back from the allocation?
It would have been in terms of the overall mix of factors, yes.
Okay, thank you. And in terms of visual encroachment?
I would say the site has built form to the south, and obviously we are now proposing some residential allocation across the expressway to the east, to the west, which may increase the visual encroachment.
Okay, thank you. And just to sum up, in terms of the council's overall assessment, in terms of the contribution which the site makes to Greenbelt purposes.
The overall purpose was assessed as being moderate.
Okay, thank you. That's useful. And just want to open up the discussion there. Mr. Hopkins, would you like to say how you consider that the site contributes to Greenbelt purposes?
Yeah. So, thank you, Mum. Just in terms of the background, we've obviously been involved in this site for a long time, going back to probably 2012, and obviously been engaging with the council throughout that period, going right back to the core strategy submission changes. So during that time, and obviously you just heard in terms of the site and when it was allocated in the Reg 18, we undertook and we commissioned a specialist landscape consultants to assess the Greenbelt review and the methodology approach, but also to look at the individual parcels and to look at the way the sites have been assessed. So as part of that process, we went through the methodology. We were supporting that, and we made that clear in our submissions, that you'll see that we were basically there was a clear direction of growth in terms of the towards the northern section of the Greenbelt, which was clear in terms of this area, the SLR7 area, and which clearly would be looking to release for the housing needs side of it. In terms of the individual sites and the garden centre site, as well as Mr. Cross was saying, both sites were originally looking to be taken out of the Greenbelt. But specifically, the two parcels we were looking at, the conclusion from the review that we took was that specifically the garden centre is a very prominent feature, commercial feature in the local landscape, and specifically SG12, which is adjacent to the garden centre. It's together with the garden centre scores at the lowest end of the Greenbelt function. The site SG12 has strong boundaries, and Mr. Cross has gone through the sort of boundary strengths, but we saw the northern boundary is identified as being moderate strength. We've got a continuous strong hedge line along there with groups of trees with no gaps along that boundary. The eastern boundary is very strong. We've got Twyford Lane, which is obviously a strong highway, and the southern boundary is moderate, but that's the boundary to the garden centre, which clearly has got fencing. It's demarcated from the garden centre, so we believe that to be moderate. And the western boundary, as Mr. Cross said, is a strong boundary with the dismantled railway line, which is the Greenway cycleway. So in terms of the strengths, it is strong. We believe that the moderate boundary strength, particularly on the north and on the southern side of it, the parcels are contained, and that was the conclusions we came to, and already has a high level of visual encroachment. So we don't believe that the site scores that highly in terms of Greenbelt purposes, but it's no different to a lot of the other sites which have been allocated and scored better than some of the sites which have been released. And I think you've got taken to one of the documents this morning, which was in the Greenbelt review, which is map 12B, which shows the overall Greenbelt function group sites. And that shows the Notcutts site and SG12 as being having a partial contribution to Greenbelt function rather than a moderate one. So as you can see, out of all the allocations, it's one of the few sites which scored the lowest out of the adjoining allocations as well. So I think it needs to be looked in context. I think just clarifying the site area. What you've seen the submissions. We've produced layout plans, and Mr. Cross writes in terms of the site area. We've actually produced layouts which look at the development of the site in conjunction with the garden centre as well. And the site area of that is increased with the white land. So we are looking at a capacity of over 225 units that we could get, which looks at rationalising the garden centre of the white land, largely taking out a lot of the greenhouses which are vacant at the moment, and the former sort of horticultural areas within the white land. So it has got greater capacity when you take it in conjunction with the garden centre. I think there was one other point which I just want to pick up on with Mr. Cross said. One of the reasons it got dropped from the Reg 19 plan was because of the agricultural land classification, which is stated as being grade 2. We can't find any record of that. I'm not sure where that's come from. We've checked it. The site has not been surveyed, but we've checked it on Magic, which is obviously a government's website in terms of looking at, and that shows that the site has not been surveyed, but all the land around it are either 3A or 3B. So it's difficult to believe how you could have an island site within the middle of all the surrounding lands as being 3A and 3B as being grade 2. So we can't find any record of that. That's not come, as far as I'm aware, come from us. So I'm not too sure where that's come from. So I think when you do look at the map on Magic, it is actually we think there's a good chance it's more like 3A or 3B. So in terms of its quality, obviously, we've looked at the way that it's being scored as well, and we believe that this site has a major contribution to make to housing need in the area. But from the surveys that we've had undertaken, the landscape assessment, Greenbelt, we still believe that there is a strong case to release the land. So that's a long-winded way of responding. Apologies for that.
Okay, thank you. We'll just rewind a little bit. I think firstly, if we can pick up on the agricultural land classification point, just as a sort of a factual point. And Mr. Cross, is there a way you can clarify that, or can you confirm where your grade 2 classification came from?
We'll happily have a check back and see the layer and try and get you the date for the layer, the date the layer was taken. We have downloaded the latest agricultural land data. I'll have to double check and see what that's showing, but I'm happy to try that as a clarification if that's acceptable.
Okay. Just on that point, would that alter your assessment of the site in any way? In terms of whether it should come forward in the shorter term?
Possibly not. I say obviously we are proposing it as safeguarded land. We're not proposing it that it is retained as greenbelt. So the council did previously recommend its allocation. So we're clearly saying that we think it doesn't have particularly strong greenbelt function that warrants it, that insists on its retention. So we are looking at removing it from the greenbelt. However, it simply comes down to just the amount of land that is required in order to meet the development needs of the borough, and we effectively felt that the mix of sites, obviously we required less land than was set out in the publication draft, and we revisited sites in terms of the greenbelt function and everything in the round, and concluded that the best approach for the wider site was white land for the garden centre and safeguarded for the additional land. So if it was grade 3, would it tip the difference? Debatable, possibly not.
Okay, thank you. And Mr. Hopkins, in terms of the summary of the contribution which the site makes to greenbelt purposes, for that particular site, for the safeguarded site, the council's assessment was that the site makes a moderate contribution to greenbelt purposes. Do you disagree or agree with that?
Well, yes, sorry. the assessment that we had done by the landscape consultants basically was identifying it as being moderate to low. We believe, in terms of the purposes, that the boundary strengths that have been identified, it has strong boundaries, particularly to the south and the east. So it's in terms of its impact on the sprawl of large built-up areas. Purpose 2, parcels. This parcel would have a limited impact, as we heard this morning, on the resulting gap between settlements. It's one of the widest parts, and it would, we concluded, have a very limited impact on the resulting gap. And certainly in terms of purpose 3, the Greenbelt review that we've undertaken, it has a limited contribution to preserving the character of the countryside. So I think we consider that it's more likely to be moderate to low, and which is scoring, if not better than many of the allocated sites which have been identified.
Okay, thank you. Just moving on now to look at the effects of potential development on the purposes of the Greenbelt. Mr. Cross, could you just outline your view in terms of the effect that any potential development in the future would have on those purposes of the Greenbelt, please?
So I think it is quite clear. I mean, as it is a quite well-defined standalone site, it could be developed without risking further encroachment. And so I'm quite sure that a strong permanent boundary could be achieved along the northern edge. I don't think we're disputing that. It does form, I say, a moderate northward projection, which in itself would possibly be incongruous, but in combination with the proposal for W49, isn't overly significant. So we do feel that, yes, the site could come forward at some point in the future without making a major detriment to the surrounding Greenbelt.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Hopkins, in terms of the effect of the development.
I largely agree with that. We, in terms of the boundaries in particular to the site, these are acknowledged as being largely urban in character. They either run along the existing highway or existing vegetated boundaries, and we've assessed those as being low to moderate in strength. So I'd largely agree with Cross on the point.
Okay, thank you. I'm conscious Mr. or Mrs. Harper would like to come into the discussion.
Just wanted to emphasise the fact that as you can see from the map, that it is specifically a bit of an outlier in terms of the rest of the urban area and, of course, the Greenbelt proposals, which has already been pointed out. And probably the only reason that it's been put into a safeguarded land is because the council needed to provide for additional 2,284 houses in the previous version of the plan. And of course that is reduced, and therefore they've transferred the land that was originally identified for housing to be in fact put into safeguarded land. And that means that we've now got something like 70 hectares of land in safeguarded across Widnes. So therefore we should be looking to, which is many more years than you need, even at the end of the plan. And therefore we should be looking to reduce the amount of safeguarded land, and maybe this is one that gets put back into Greenbelt. So that's my view.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Cross, anything to add after Mr. Harper's comments?
I think one of the previous sessions we looked at the quantity of safeguarded land and estimated the number of years of development land supply it represented. So I'll probably just refer back to that.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Hopkins, you referred to the fact that the existing garden centre would be reconfigured, if you like, and the use would be consolidated, but it would remain as an existing use. How would the sort of boundary, the southern boundary, be sort of treated, if you like, between the garden centre and the site, the potential safeguarded site?
We've got, in the submissions that we've made, there are two options for looking at the layout of the site. So the first one is looking at the existing garden centre, keeping it in the same alignment with the same access to the garden centre, and so that would just keep the existing boundaries to the site with access coming through the area of land which is currently not used, which is the glass house. So that option wouldn't affect the garden centre at all. It would continue to operate. We've also, in discussion with the owners of the garden centre, who are very keen to maintain and to their operation in this area, but also to invest in it. And they're very keen to. It's a successful garden centre, and to really take it forward and invest in the garden centre. So there's an opportunity to look at reconfiguring the operation, and not in terms of the existing buildings, but where we put the access and the car parking for the garden centre, which could go into the safeguarded land. And we would look at then creating a strong boundary along the south. So we would develop the residential further south into the white land, and the majority of the garden centre would stay the existing buildings. The main garden centre building would stay where it is, with the car parking further to the north into the white land. So we considered that very carefully in terms of the boundaries to the site, and Notcutts have looked at that from our operational point of view and are happy with the way that could be configured.
Okay, thank you. Just moving on to exceptional circumstances. Obviously, Mr. Troy explained that whilst there needs to be a sort of general requirement to demonstrate exceptional circumstances, that also needs to be demonstrated at a site-specific level. Appreciating the difficulties in doing that, but Mr. Cross, can you set out in your view what the exceptional circumstances would be in particular in relation to this parcel of land?
Yes, again, as I said this morning, it is difficult to assess exceptional circumstances at this sort of scale. We're not a standalone settlement where we can look at the housing need arising, but obviously we have looked at the housing needs between Widnes and Runcorn, so north-south of the river, which you've had a lot of talk about. I say obviously the core strategy examination concluded that there was a shortfall of development land to meet the Widnes' needs. We believe that's clearly still the case. So it does show that demonstrate exceptional circumstances for choice of land around Widnes to meet the development needs of the community in Widnes. In terms of where that land is located, as I say, obviously we've been guided by the Greenbelt study and the various other studies that we've undertaken to identify the land that, if you like, the least worst options in terms of impact on the Greenbelt, and the most preferable options in terms of sustainability and access to existing infrastructure to minimise the need for additional infrastructure. And the council feels that the mix proposed does meet those requirements, and therefore we have demonstrated exceptional circumstances in relation to the sites proposed.
Okay, Mr. Hopkins, do you agree with the council's position in relation to exceptional circumstances?
Yes, I'd just like to add to that. I think we believe that this site has the potential to make an important contribution to housing need. The need to meet the requirements, particularly in the north and northeast of the borough. I think there's a couple of other points. One is obviously referring back to the map in the Greenbelt Review, map 12B, in terms of that shows the site as scoring low against Greenbelt tests, and in terms of it being making a partial contribution. We believe that this site is well placed, best placed to accommodate those housing needs. It's a sustainable site from an economic and ecological point of view, and it also has the ability to provide improvements to the greenway, which runs along the western boundary. It's one part of the proposal for the options we're looking at is to because that runs along the aqueduct, which runs along that part of the site, and there's an opportunity to develop within that area and improve the footpath network together with a cycle network as well in the area, which will provide significant benefits to the local area, and that's out in our submissions.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Hopkins. Any other contributions in terms of the Greenbelt study or the effective development on the Greenbelt before we move on?
Was just add a little context to say, probably if you look at the policies map, you can see that there is a greenway runs along the northern edge of the expressway. Basically, it's from Cranshaw, it goes over the expressway at Cranshaw Hall to the west of W49, then runs along the northern edge of the expressway, popping out close to SG12. I would just say that is a very well-used, well-trafficked greenway, so it is viewed as being a very important feature for the local community.
Okay, thank you.
Just to make the point, that's what we're looking to improve, and it's to obviously the access to that either from the site, but also we're looking to include further land within that to bolster that greenway and improve it further.
And in terms of the need to offset, the loss of greenbelt land, would the improvement of that greenway be the contribution towards that offsetting?
Absolutely, and I was going to come back to that point, but that certainly makes a contribution to it, and it's land that is currently, some of the land is currently occupied by glass houses, former glass houses from the horticultural operation that took place on the site, but yes, there would be benefits there and gains.
Thank you. And Mr. Cross, does the council consider that those improvements to the greenway in that location would help to offset the loss of the land from the Greenbelt?
Yes, I think we would concur with that. I think the map that we're being referred to is on page 35 of their proof. I think it's option 2, illustrative master plan.
Yes.
That's Mr. Hopkins' proof.
I've got that, thank you.
34 and 35.
Yeah, got that, thank you very much. Right, okay. Any other points in terms of the Greenbelt issue? No? Just moving on to the next question in relation to the potential adverse impacts of developing the site and how these could be mitigated. Mr. Cross, do you want to kick off on that issue? Mr. Cross, you're still muted.
The joys of working across 2 screens, I apologise. I say we have included, the summary table of the results of the essay, I believe, are on page 514 of our Matter 12 statement. And it shows that the site has, development site has minor negative effects on the potential impact on heritage, impact on health, which again will just be in terms of the distance to the nearest facilities, and education. Again, the site is distant from, or comparatively distant from, the nearest primary school. So they say other than that, there's not any particular negative impacts environmental impacts associated with the development of the site have been identified.
The site performer identifies that 3% of the land's potentially contaminated, I believe. Is that?
If it says that will probably be that there has been ponds infilled. That's usually the case. I think the Halton was one of the pilot authorities for the setting out the potentially contaminated land registers. It basically involved a trawling through of historic mapping to identify potentially contaminating features And obviously, where previous maps identified, say, particularly ponds that are now no longer present in the landscape, the assumption is that they may well have been backfilled at some point. And obviously, if we're not aware of what the film is, then we went on a potentially contaminated register. As obviously, say that there is potential that the fill material could be contaminated, so it should be investigated prior to development.
Okay, Mr. Hopkins, is that something that's come up in any initial survey work?
No, it's not. It's not been identified at all. I mean, the clients are not aware of any potential contamination. I mean, the SG12 has been in agricultural use for a long time, and it's been used in the past for arable as well. So that did come as a surprise, and it's not something that they're aware of or have any indication that there's any contamination on the site, given the existing and previous use on the site. Okay,
thank you. And the site was identified as being in landscape character area. Is that right, Mr. Cross?
I think every site is identified as being within a landscape character area. The landscape character assessment effectively described the areas rather than overly scoring or giving them a quality assessment. There was, I say, a vague quality assessment, and I did recommend in some areas for improvement or some areas for retention.
I've got a note here, the UDP, so there's an important landscape feature. Was that the sort of public footpath greenway?
Potentially, I would have to double check, I'm afraid, sorry. Maybe if one of my colleagues could have a quick check.
Okay. And there's also a reference to local wildlife site. Just maybe clarify on those points.
Again, the local wildlife sites were, assessed or identified with a view to the current situation. Unfortunately, yes, there are some areas that have been identified as having potential value or having value that we are proposing for development. It's just simply given the constrained nature of the borough, it's entirely impossible to completely avoid them.
Okay, Mr. Hopkins, how would how would those features, if you like, be taken into account in any future development?
Yeah, if I can just pick up on those points, we're not aware. We've looked in terms of the technical assessments we've undertaken. There's no ecological value. There's no any local, regional, or international designations close to the site. The nearest nature reserve is Victoria Park. That's significant distance away from the site. So we don't believe in the advice we've had back it's going to be affected in any way from an ecological point of view. I think the other points that were raised, we're still perplexed as to why the sustainability appraisal, it scores poorly on heritage. There's no heritage assets within the vicinity of the site, and that's not something that we've got any knowledge of. We've done searched on that, we've taken advice on it. So again, that's a bit of a surprise, but I'm not sure if that's a blanket scoring on that. But it's not applicable to this site.
Is that something Mr. Cross can look into?
I'm just looking it up as we speak to see if it appears. No, it says heritage non-applicable. So it just says no. It's saying designations that just says it's within the green belt. No, the appraisal doesn't appear to identify heritage as. We'll check the scoring. We'll see where the scores come from.
Okay, thank you.
So I think that's what it said in the Greenbelt review. So I'm a bit surprised to see that within that side.
We'll just maybe just have a quick clarification on those points when you get a chance, Mr. Cross. The other thing I just wanted to pick up on is the potential noise aspect being adjacent to the highway network and how that's been taken into account.
Again, as you can see, the site immediately to the south, which is shown as primarily residential, that site's probably been developed within certainly the last 12 years as 2 phases. And obviously W40 similarly abuts the highway even more so. Yes, noise is a potential nuisance, and obviously the designs of the scheme would have to take account of that. I'm sure Mr. Plant could probably say the sort of mitigation measures that our environmental health colleagues usually request, probably involving sort of physical screening or occasionally, I think, enhanced glazing. But perhaps Mr. Plant could provide additional detail.
Okay, Mr. Hopkins, did you want to say how that's been taken into account in your considerations?
Sorry. Yeah, in terms of the noise side of it, obviously we've got the development we're looking at is set back from Watkinson Way. So we've got the greenway in between, and as I said before, that we're looking to bolster that. It is very, very, very heavily vegetated along that boundary. It's well screened, and we're looking to set any development back beyond the greenway, the enhanced greenway. You've got a lot of residential, a lot closer to the highway than we would be looking to propose. And just for clarification, something in terms of the operational garden centre, we don't believe, and we'll look at mitigation measures to make sure that as that's operating, there won't be any impact on any surrounding houses, either through hours of use operation or servicing as well.
Okay,
So happy with.
Thank you. So nothing that can't be overcome potentially through the use of mitigation measures. Okay, the other point I wanted to pick up on, the site performer identified that the site only had satisfactory connectivity. It's just really to pick up on how that would be addressed and improved through the development. Mr. Cross.
Again, I think as was discussed a little bit earlier in relation to W40, the site and the existing residential, they do form a little bit of a residential island at the moment. So the access to the facilities, the pedestrian access to facilities is not necessarily the best. There are obviously, as mentioned, there will be proposals to improve the facilities in relation to W40, and also probably the wider opportunity to improve the wider environment facilities in relation to the development of W9, which will make this area feel a lot more connected to the town and have a lot better sustainable transport connections, both in terms of walking and in terms of cycling. In terms of facilities, the nearest facilities, previously the local centres, were somewhat distant, but obviously now on the sites, on your policies map is TC4, there's a brand new, and I'm going to get this wrong, I'm going to say Aldi, and it's bound to be a Lidl. I can never remember which one, so I'm sure it's a new Aldi store. It's probably opened there within about the last 6 months. A bit further down there is Farnworth Local Centre, but yes, it is. It's quite a little bit of a trail. But the Aldi will probably provide for day-to-day shopping needs in reasonably close proximity to the development area.
Okay. In terms of accessibility to public transport, would that be very similar to the discussion we had in terms of SRL 7 North East Widnes in terms of the bus services? Yes,
I think the nearest main services will be located on Derby Road South Lane, so they are a little bit distant. I would have to double check and see if SG12 as a standalone site is just about within the 400 metres distance. I'm not sure if there's services up Mill Lane. Maybe somebody could clarify that for me.
Mr. Hopkins, in terms of your initial work on the site, has that looked at accessibility?
Yeah, we looked at the accessibility just in terms of the bus stops from the development we're looking at in terms of the options. It's 300 metres, so it's within the 400 metres. So we believe that the site is just over a kilometre from the nearest commercial centre. It's the obviously the supermarket that Mr. Cross was talking about is an Aldi, I believe, right? So it's relatively close to that. We're 150 metres from primary school, and the secondary school is just over a kilometre. We've got a GP surgery which is just approximately a kilometre away, and the nearest employment is half a kilometre in distance. So, but we believe that, yeah, as part of the, as discussed this morning, a comprehensive development in the area, and yeah, those services will be improved.
And in terms of improving pedestrian links to the town,
obviously, you know, we talked before about picking up and, you know, tying in with the greenway and providing access directly from the site onto the greenway as well to improve that connectivity.
And just how could that potentially link into W49? You sort of to the permeability through the sort of edge of the urban area to, for example, TC4.
I think I've not got the overall map, but I think there is an opportunity to improve that, to bring those improvements to that link.
Just considering sort of looking at the overall master planning, if you like, of North East Widnes and how the sites relate to each other.
Sorry, yeah, I'm just looking at the proposals map. So there's a link directly going straight through W9, which picks up the greenway, going right through the centre. So that ties in with the greenway as it comes out onto Mill Lane.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Harper or Mrs. Harper.
Thank you. I was just to confirm that the road connection will be to Mill Lane, will it? Because that is not a good connection. I mean, that road.
Mill Lane is a very narrow, windy country lane at the present. Nothing that has been said so far indicates that there's going to be any plan to widen or straighten that road. And I'm just sort of thinking, if you've got a child of 5 who's got to be taken to school, and maybe a toddler in a pram as well, you expect them to walk down the greenway all the way down to Moorfield Road School in a winter's morning? Because the traffic certainly would be too bad would be very difficult as well.
Just Mr. Cross, could you respond to the point in relation to the access? My notes show that the access would be off Mill Lane, potentially secondary access off Twyford Lane. Is that right?
Yeah, I say at the moment, say Mill Lane is, you know, the two sections within the borough. We have the section between the two roundabouts adjacent to W40, which is sort of quasi-dual carriageway. I think it's got a central divider between those lanes. Then as you're heading out of town up past the garden centre, yes, it is sort of it's a country road in nature. With I think the section up to the garden centre, I think the footpath is only on the garden centre site and is probably quite narrow, say not overly attractive. Obviously, as part of the boundary treatments and the work for bringing forward W9, we would be looking to improve the pedestrian connectivity. So we would be looking to see an appropriate treatment to basically provide for pedestrians along the western edge of W9. And I think that a colleague, Mr. Peake, did mention the possibility of, there might be need for crossing improvements. So yes, I say the stretch from the road down at the moment is not particularly attractive, and no, it's not. You wouldn't necessarily want to walk it in a dark, windy night with small children in tow. But to say, as part of the development of the wider area, those facilities should be improved. As to the quality of the road heading north, obviously that's within the neighbouring authority of St Helens. Yes, it is a twisty road. It does have some residential properties along it. It is a bit of a shortcut through from Bolton and the bottom end of St Helens, so it is reasonably well trafficked. I believe it is a 30 zone whenever you come into Halton. So with the comprehensive, the wider development within the area, I say we're happy that satisfactory provision can be made. And I'm sure, if Mr. Peake's still on, he'll, I'm sure, clarify that point for me.
Mr. Peake, would you like to come in at this point?
Yes, ma'am. As I say, when we looked at the site contexts, we obviously just had a red line plan around the site with no indication of to what extent the site would be brought over for residential, or if any space would be reserved for a commercial development. That's already present. The existing site has an access at the moment onto Mill Lane with no recorded road safety issue. Footways to the frontage are narrow all the way across the front, and there are footways on both sides of the road, but again, being in a sort of semi-rural setting, they are tended to be overgrown by vegetation. So any development that came through on W9, I believe, would sort of address that issue in terms of improvements to pedestrian stroke cycle links. As colleagues have sort of suggested, there would be stronger links to the Greenway running through W9 from Derby Road up to the Mineral Line, which then takes you on your onward journey either to St Helens or Cranshaw Lane, which you'll be able to see on the maps as existing greenways. In terms of what's being put forward, we've not really been party to the plans for the indicative layouts, so we can't pass comment on the suitability of those plans at this moment in time. If we request to do so, we could do to give more detail. But all I can state is that there is an existing point of connection onto the network that does cater for significant movements with a busy garden centre that's expanded over the years with no road safety implications at that particular point on the network.
Okay, thank you. Ms. Hopkins, did you have anything to add in terms of the access issues?
Yeah, thank you. I think the points made, looking at the access and certainly the pavements, which we need to look at as part of a comprehensive development of the site. Just to make it clear in terms of the access onto Twyford Lane, that was just being looked at as an emergency access. So some access we'll be looking at is Mill Lane, which is the access point we've had initial advice on. So, but yes, there may be some improvements needed to the wider carriageway at that point, but that could be, as Mr. Cross has said, be carried out as part of a more comprehensive development in the area.
Okay, thank you. And just considering the relationship of SG12 with the other sites in North East Widnes, how would the council ensure, sort of through development management process, that there would be a joined up approach, if you like, to those sites in terms of infrastructure and pedestrian connectivity, etc.? Mr. Cross, or?
I'll start, and then I shall probably bring in Mr. Plant. Obviously, as I say, we have identified the requirement or the potential for the greenway across W9, basically along the alignment of the aqueduct. There are various, other greenways in the vicinity of the site, including, say, the Mineral Line and up to Cranshaw Lane. I think, say, Mr. Plant can basically say how his development control team operate and how they would see the plan delivering the comprehensive scheme.
I think in particular, Mr. Plant, do you consider that can be achieved without any sort of site-specific criteria set out in the plan? If you could address that point in particular.
Yes, I think it can be achieved. I think Mr. Peake's awareness of the wider schemes is usually how this is picked up on in other areas in terms of making sure that infrastructure carries on through and is developed through the local plan. So particularly in respect to the Greenway and Cranshaw Lane, that's been done at the other end of the site in terms of the widening, along with the red road that came forward on Lunseath Road, again, where infrastructure requirements were taken forward and brought forward comprehensively.
Okay, thank you. We've touched on the sort of local highway issues. Just moving on to the next question in terms of infrastructure requirements and costs. Is there anything else to add in terms of the local highway network before we move on? No. In terms of the strategic highway network, I'm assuming that the response would be the same for the other sites in North East Widnes in terms of the junction 7 on the M62 issue. Would that be correct, Mr. Cross?
Correct. Yes.
Okay, thank you. And in terms of education, the same response as this morning?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. Any other infrastructure requirements or costs which may prevent the site coming forward that we haven't already touched on?
Not that we're aware of, no.
No. Mr. Hopkins?
I think we've covered most of it. We have looked at issues such as utilities and also drainage on the site. So, we've taken advice on that, and it is possible that we can drain, we can go into the main system, and also there's utilities that obviously the garden centre has got supply there. So there is certainly in terms of electricity and gas, etc. Then there is an existing supply that we can tie into. And as I said, we've looked at drainage, and that's not considered to be an issue.
Okay, thank you. Mrs. Harper.
Yes, I just wondered, with all this talk about Cranshaw Lane, I wondered whether the council were actually intending to adopt the road of Cranshaw Lane, which is unadopted at the moment, so that people can access that greenway without going through very muddy fields as we've had to do this winter.
Is that a question for Mr. Peake?
I can attempt to, ma'am, but I don't know if that's a relevant matter for this inquiry or not. If you feel that we need to do some investigation, I need to speak to colleagues in the adoption teams, I can do. All I'd say is it's an existing public right-of-way up Cranshaw Lane, skirts around some houses, crosses the expressway, the bypass, and then cuts back down. I've utilised it via push bike and by foot in recent years frequently, and never experienced the problems that the lady has mentioned, but I can certainly raise it with the team who deal with public rights of way at the authority.
Okay, thank you. Unless Mrs. Harper feels particularly strongly on that point in terms of how it relates to this particular site, I don't feel the need to pursue that any further. No. Are there any other points in terms of the infrastructure requirements or costs, or any other physical constraints which may prevent the site from coming forward in the future? I think we've touched on the aqueduct, haven't we, in relation to other sites? Yeah. Okay. Just now looking at the availability of the site in the longer term, slightly lower tests in relation to safeguarded sites in terms of deliverability. But just from starting with the council, is the site available for development in the longer term? And obviously we have active landowners and developers interested in bringing the site forward. What's the council's view on that?
Yes, I say the council believes the site is developable. Obviously, it's treated as being not available in the SLA as it's currently greenbelt, and the proposal is that it's safeguarded land, and obviously safeguarded land is not considered available within the plan period. I would ask, however, are you wanting to fill in the table as if the site were an allocation, so you can see the deliverability in terms of lead-in times and build-out rates, should you be minded to support an allocation at this time?
I think it would be useful, but probably keeping the safeguarded sites separately. So, say were the site to come forward sooner to be allocated, what the potential would be in terms of start dates and output. But that would obviously just emphasise any discussion in terms of the potential output from the site, as Mr. Troy alluded to. It does not prejudice our deliberation of that particular site. Is just were the site to come forward, what the start date and output would be. But yes, it would be useful to have that in terms of the deliverability of the site. And is that something that the council and Mr. Hopkins could agree on in this session?
Well, as I say, the starting point for the SLA, I say at the moment the SLA would treat it as not deliverable, or sort of not available. However, if the site were supported through the examination, effectively the position, given the size of the site, notional size, I'm assuming, would apply the 50 to 150 unit threshold at the moment. Although I accept Mr. Hopkins did and identify that the wider site could have potential for 225. But if it was in the middle site ranking with no current permission, we would assume a lead-in time of 7.5 years and a build-out rate of 30 units per annum.
Thank you. I'm guessing Mr. Hopkins may have a more optimistic view of deliverability.
Yeah, in terms of the availability, the site is available. We obviously, as Mr. Cross knows, we've been talking to them for some considerable time, and the land is on a license to an agricultural tenant at the moment, which expires in August this year. So the land is genuinely available, and we've got it's in one ownership. And as I said to you, the owners are looking to look at their operation there and look at the opportunity to reconfigure and invest in the garden centre itself. So we believe that yes, it would be more optimistic than that. That if the site comes forward, then we would be looking to go out to the market. We've already, through colleagues, we've already been sort of testing, soft market testing, in terms of the site itself. So we would market that over a period, and then obviously seek planning, whether that's one comprehensive application for the reconfiguration of the garden centre as well. But we think that it's probably more likely to be the end of 2023 and early 2024 before we were able to get onto the site. We've talking to colleagues in our residential team, we're probably looking at one output on it, so it'll be more like 40 dwellings per annum, which is based upon the figures that we talked about. It is approximately 6 years build out.
Mr. Cross, all things being equal, what's your view on the developer's position?
Yes, as I say, it's the SLA tends to be cautious in terms of sites that aren't committed. If that's the sort of time frame, what I took from that was potentially starting on site 2024, so probably generating units 24, 25, and coming forward at a rate of 40 dwellings per annum. We can add that to the table.
Would that be a full year's output in terms of 24, 25?
I can adjust it to a half year's output if you prefer. I say from what I was said, I think being consistent with what we said this morning, it sounds like if you were on site in 24, then we can call it half. We'll do 20 in year one.
Mr. Hopkins?
Yeah, we're happy to go with that.
Okay, Mr. Hopkins, is there a developer actually on board? Have you had discussions with developers?
No, we haven't. Obviously, with the site not being allocated, as we're not in a position to formally go to the market. But as I said before, we through colleagues in our residential team, we have been taking soundings in terms of the site, and there's obviously significant interest. So we don't believe there would be an issue, and it wouldn't be too protracted in terms of the marketing of the site. So, but at this stage, no, it's just purely us advising on the site.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Cross, just a general question really in terms of the length of time that planning applications are taking to go through the system, and if there's on sites of that size, or how long it's taking the council at the moment to negotiate on Section 106 obligations, just to help to inform future discussions for the rest of the next couple of weeks. Do you have sort of any timescales, any standard timescales? Is it monitored in terms of the how long it takes to get such sites through the planning system? And other timescales we're talking about realistic.
You can tell that I'm going to say that's one for Mr. Plant.
We haven't monitored particular timescales in terms of we don't set out how long in terms of signing a 106. We just tend to work with the developer in terms of getting those signed as quickly as we can. And obviously negotiating those as part of drafting the committee reports. So in terms of timescales and probably past history, it's case by case. So it was mentioned earlier about the outline for site W9 or 10. That one's taken longer and the Section 106 isn't completed, yet we've had a larger scheme in Daresbury that's actually gone through the application process much quicker, and we're now closer to signing the 106. Obviously, I've not mentioned any timescales yet in terms of assisting with that, so we can look into that. But unfortunately, yeah, it's case by case, and we work with developers to get them signed and issued as soon as we can.
Okay, I mean, I know that there have been, in terms of today's discussion, start dates of 2023, 24 mentioned. Is that something that seems realistic in your experience of dealing with such applications through the planning system?
Again, I think they're probably the optimistic side. I think it would be those timescales at the earliest. It comes down to the site constraints on an individual basis. But yeah, those at the earliest.
Okay, thank you. That's noted. Thank you. I think perhaps.
Sorry, I was just going to say. I would say, obviously, you're concerned about the calculation of the 5-year supply. I was just going to point you towards the 5-year housing supply calculation for 2019 contained in the last AMR, which is HOU 10-3. Whilst it was calculated on the first page against the standard method, on the second page we have put the calculation based on the emerging DALP proposal of 350. And currently that identifies that the deliverable requirement is 256%. So as at 2019, we had 12.8 years supply.
Okay, thank you. I would just sort of urge realism in terms of, you know, that the sort of initial sort of starting point for a site, and when it's likely how it's likely to progress through the planning system before the start date actually on site. That's something I just want to have a think about for future discussions over the next couple of weeks. So it would be a single developer, single outlet, and was it 40 per annum you said? Yeah. Okay. Right. Well, I think that concludes my questions on this particular site. Does anyone else like to make any comments in summary before we close today's session? You've been very well behaved today, everybody.
I just want to say, don't let them have it, please. And the time of the planning department, we've got a little domestic issue which was put in November and still hasn't had planning permission granted. So, you know, the times they're talking for a huge application like that, when you've got people like us who are obviously going to object to them at the time, I think they're very, very optimistic.
Thank you. That's slightly out of my remit there, Mrs. Harper. Okay, well, just to say thank you all for your contributions today. If there's nothing else to add, we shall see some of you back tomorrow at 9:30. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, Mom.